Hi, I'm Joni Patry, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Well, now I decided to do a series that I thought you might find very interesting, and I'm going to call this series My World of Astrology. And in this series, I'm going to do snippets of my life as an astrologer. And what I intend to do in this series is to have segments throughout my life and how I learned astrology. And within this storytelling, some of it's pretty entertaining about my life and how I got into astrology, what it means, but most of all, I'll have little learning lessons also about astrology. But the most ancient reference to astrology comes from the nakshatras in the Vedas, the ancient Indian scriptures from India. And these Vedas, oh my God, they're so interesting. They are written in the form of hymns, like song, music, and hymns. And let me tell you this, it is the body of man that they're making relative to in the Vedas. And the arms, the limbs, I think they're associated with yoga. So there's different studies that the hymns are attributed to for the man, for the god or the man, the great Purusha, which is the man of all times, the great Maha Purusha, which is great men. But here's what's so interesting in the Vedas. The reference to astrology, Vedic astrology, in the ancient scriptures, the Vedas, is called Jyotish. That is actually the term for Vedic astrology. We call it Vedic because it comes from the Vedas these days, but it's actually Indian astrology and it's called Jyotish. And Jyotish actually is, if you translate it, it means science of light. And here's another beautiful thing. It is considered Jyotish to be the eyes of the Vedas, the eyes of man in the hymns of the body of man. What does that tell you? It tells you that the ancient seers are trying to tell us that this gives us sight and vision into the world. Astrology, this is written in the ancient Vedas. And in the Vedas, they talk of certain nakshatras. And I believe it's Abhijit, which makes them 28 nakshatras, which we only use 27. I believe it's in between, it's somewhere in Capricorn and, is it at Capricorn and Aquarius? I think, I'll have to go back and look at that. But regardless, it makes the nakshatras 28 of them. It isn't used in astrology today. So we only use the 27 nakshatras, which the nakshatras are what make Vedic astrology what it is. Oh my gosh, I have so much to talk about. And I'm talking about this in a story form. So let me go back to once I became a Vedic astrologer, had my university. Let me go back to when I opened my center in Dallas, Texas, the Dallas Metaphysical Center. Oh, those were fun days. And when I opened it, I invited my old astrology teacher, Robert Wilkinson, which we all knew affectionately as Bob back in the 70s in the old hippie days. Yes, that was Bob. And I'll tell you something that was so cool. It was in 2017 at a conference I was teaching. Hadn't seen Bob in years. I'm speaking at this conference and I look over in the right of my eye and I thought, no way. That looks like Bob Wilkinson. I'll be damned if it wasn't my original astrology teacher from the 70s. And that is when he told me I was one of the best students he ever had. Anyway, okay, so going back to this, that was a funny story, but going back to the 70s and becoming a flight attendant, studying astrology was so mystical and spiritual, and what a blast I had doing so. But yes, I want to go back to my center. So when I opened my center, I believe it was 1995. Yes, 1995. I was still doing the Western astrology, but I was studying the Vedic at the time, but wasn't proficient in the Vedic yet. 94, 95. I opened my center on Lover's Lane, and I invited Robert Wilkinson, to come be the speaker. Oh, it was fabulous. And that's where it all started, and I taught my astrology classes there. And throughout the years, brought all of the Vedic astrologers. And then I got so into Vedic. When I first started doing the Vedic charts, of course, I couldn't get used to the square charts. You know, I was used to the circular charts, but when I went to all the conferences, the Vedic conferences, they never put circular charts up. I had to learn how to read those square charts. So all of you think you can't convert, which I thought the same thing. You had to back then, because all the teachers used the square charts. If you're going to follow along in class, you had to give up the circular charts. So it just so happened back in the early days, everyone used the South Indian style charts. So that's why I use the South Indian style charts. Most of the astrologers came from South India. So for those of you that don't know, there's two different kinds of charts. They read exactly the same. It's just the format's different. One has the diamond in the middle. That's the North Indian style chart. And therefore in India, it was mainly that the astrologers that came from the North used that North Indian style chart. But my teachers were all from the South of India. And even my Western teachers, that, you know, Dennis Harness, Dennis Flaherty, all of those people, Edith Hathaway, all of those people back in the day, Christina Collins, they all used the South Indian style chart. So I did too. And I like it. So I'm going to continue. I know a lot of the new astrologers today use the North. I can't spot the aspects in the North. That's my thing. So anyway, I use the South Indian style chart, and it's just the style. They read the same. People get all up in arms about which one's better. It's not. It's what you're familiar with, what you like. It's crazy. People are so... And I'm going to get into a whole series about why I think astrologers are so opinionated. Golly, I've never seen a group of people. Well, let me just say it now. I'll get into further detail. But as an astrologer, your whole life you're condemned and people laugh at you. So anywhere that you can get any credibility, you go wild with it. That's what happens with astrologers. And I've never seen a group of people fight more about who's right and who's wrong. It's supposed to be spiritual. That's why I got into Vedic astrology. But as time got on, with all these opinions and who's right and who's wrong, oh, and you can't practice Vedic astrology, you're a Westerner and you're a white girl with blue eyes, stop it. I've had all sorts of crazy things like that. It is a spiritual science, and I'm not going to back down from all this silly talk of ignorance, because that is totally ignorant. This is a divine science, and everyone on planet Earth should have the opportunity to practice and be it. Because in India, they won't give you their secrets away. Oh my God, if they gave their secrets away, we could take it to the next level. Because then it develops into something more. And I'm here to give you all my secrets too, by the way. But let me go back into the early days. Well, I'll make a whole video on my early days as a flight attendant with all the flight attendants. It's hilarious and it's a blast and it's very heartwarming. So, but one thing I wanted to go into before I finish today, because I have been talking, I know this is being broken up, but I've been talking for over 2 hours now. Anyway, this book, after I wrote my book that is my textbook for the university, which I wrote that, where is it? I'm going to have to, here it is. My book that I wrote for the university, I wrote it in 2003. Because you know what? I felt like the way all those Indian books were written, they were terrible. I couldn't understand anything. So I felt like I needed to write my own book. And I did. This is what it is. And I wrote this in 2003, and it's now my textbook for my university. Here's how this book came together. I would teach all these individual classes at my Dallas Metaphysical Center, and each class would be like, one would be on aspects, another one would be on what sidereal versus tropical is all about. Then I would have another class on yogas, and then I would have another class on rulerships and signs. And I had all these handouts, right? That before every class, I would print all the handouts, hand it out. Oh, it was a hassle. And even when I would teach at conferences, I had to get all those handouts all together. Oh, and back in the day for the projectors, we used to have these transparencies with oh my God, with those reflectors that will reflect the light from the transparency onto the wall. I used to do all that. And I had my son Preston, who was probably about 10 or 11 years old. He would come and record every single one of my classes with a cassette tape player, right? So, but anyway, I wrote, one day I thought, wouldn't it be a novel idea if I took all of my handouts and put them together and made a book, and after each handout, I used an example chart to explain what I'm doing. So that was where this book came together. It's all my handouts from all of my classes, all put together with chart examples. And it became the book that is my workbook, textbook for the University of Vedic Astrology. It's perfect. It has everything clearly explained, because I felt like all the other stuff was so unclear. It was. I had to make this easy for people to understand, because we can all understand it when it's taught properly, leaving no stone unturned. That's how I teach. Yes. So let me tell you another little fun story. My center was called Dallas Metaphysical Center. And once I got into Vedic astrology, I realized that from the whole reference of the zodiac, that there was a place in the heavens that was called the Galactic Center. And so the Galactic Center means where consciousness comes from. Because in the whole story, there's this beautiful book that Paramahansa Yogananda's teacher wrote, Swami Sayuteswar, who was a Vedic astrologer, and it's called The Holy Science. And of course, he talks about the precessional cycle, and he also talks about the Galactic Center, where God consciousness comes from. And the closer that planet Earth gets to the Galactic Center, the more aware we become on planet Earth. So the Galactic Center is this deep portion of the zodiac. It's actually in the nakshatra called Mula, which means the root. And it's where the most congregation of black holes are in our universe, which suck everything in. And you know, I started thinking about black holes and sucking things in. This could actually depict where you go from one dimension to another through the black holes. It's been talked about also from astronomy. So this was my understanding of the Galactic Center. So since I actually, from teaching Western astrology and before I really got into Vedic astrology, I closed down the Dallas Metaphysical Center for a time because it just got too hard. I wasn't making any money. I remember I would teach my classes and my husband would come up and he goes, "You mean you only have 2 people in your class? And we're paying all the bills for electricity, water." Anyway, I'd start crying and then he'd stop because I was going to do this no matter what. And yeah, I came from a time of, you know, we didn't have the internet. So to put out that I was having classes, we had to have mailers that went to people's houses talking about the classes and how do you get a whole group of people to send mailers to. Yeah, it's hard. You had to put up messages in, you know, other metaphysical centers like the Constellation Bookstore. I'd have to go on the billboard, put, you know, that I was opening up classes and things like that. It was so tough without the internet. Nobody knew you existed. So I would have like 2 people in my class and, you know, it's just the way I wasn't going to give up. So there were many times so I did close it down for a time and I rented it out for a short time. But then I wanted to open it up and change the name because I was now practicing Vedic astrology. So I used the Edgar Cayce technique that I love so much to get answers in your dreams. And his technique was you get a glass of water and you drink half of it and you say out loud what you want answered in your dream. And you keep the rest of the water by the side of the bed, and when you wake up, you finish the water and you start recording your dreams. So my question was, what should I name my center? Because I was getting ready to reopen it with a different vengeance, this time with Vedic astrology as my core reference, not Western tropical. So I had a very vivid dream and it said Galactic Center. Well, I think it was actually, I think I got this a little backwards, but I think I learned what the Galactic Center was after I had that dream in Vedic astrology, that it was the center of the universe, or it was around the same time. But I had the dream, the Galactic Center. So I told my husband, I had a dream what I'm going to change the name from the Dallas Metaphysical Center to. And I said, the Galactic Center. And he looked at me and he said, that is the stupidest name I've ever heard of. People are going to think you have something about Star Trek. And I thought, yeah, well, they might think that. Maybe that's not a good name. And then I learned about what the Galactic Center was in greater detail. And in the Vedas, or in the Holy Science, Swami Yukteswar said, that's where consciousness, that's where God consciousness comes out of. And I thought it has to be called the Galactic Center. And that was the start of my center called the Galactic Center, where I taught Vedic astrology. And that was just a few years after. So it was in the early to the late 90s when my center was there teaching Vedic astrology. And I wrote my first book in 2003. And then I was going to show you this book. This was actually my 3rd book. My 2nd book I wrote in 2008, which was Money in Astrology, because it was 2008 that everything was so screwed up around the world economically. So I'll talk about that book later. But this book I want to talk about briefly, and I'm going to get into greater detail with my whole series on My World of Astrology. That's what I think I'll call this series. Okay, so My World of Astrology. And this book is called The Divine Order of the Universe. And actually, my students like this book the very best. And do you realize this is the book that is bought the least? And some people said, well, the name's not good. I love this name because what I'm talking about in it, astrology, the divine order of the universe, that everything's in divine perfection. Everything falls into place. Everything happens for a reason at the right time. Numbers are all perfection. And I talk about the number 3 and how it is the, well, it is the number of creativity and manifestation. I mean, think about the Trinity. Think about the pyramids. Think about things happening in 3s. Anyway, that's the premise of this book. But I went into great detail. As a matter of fact, these are some of the things that I wrote in this book. And for one thing, when you're an astrologer for as long as I am, and you go through the experiences of living astrology, not just reading about it in a book and starting to apply the keywords that you memorized. No, you've got to really live it. And I have. And let me give you some of the experiences that I wrote about in this book. I have lived the astrological meanings throughout my 30 years of experience. This was, I'm up to 40 something years now. But yes, I wrote this book in 2014. Okay, yes. So that was over 10 years ago. And I said, and I think I put 30 because I didn't want to people think how old I am. I get tired of that. Oh, she looks good. Oh, how do you know, I hate that. When you get to be my age and people go, oh, you really look good, you'll find it obnoxious. Because, you know, whatever. Okay. I have lived the astrological meanings throughout my 30 years of experience. I know what Saturn's transit over the ascendant feels like when my mother died. I didn't know that Saturn on the ascendant had anything to do with the death of the mother. But I shared with one of my friends who's a Vedic astrologer, actually it's Juliana Swanson, and she said, oh my God, my mother died when Saturn was on the ascendant. Then I had clients that had Saturn crossing over their ascendant, and I said, you better be careful, you know, look out after your mother. She could be having a problem. They had the same, you were right, Joni, my mother died. Saturn was on the ascendant. Okay. So I know what Saturn's transit over the ascendant feels like, not just memorizing, when my mother died. I know what Jupiter's transit in the 5th house means as I discovered I was pregnant. You know what is so funny? I will never forget. I was at a Western astrology conference and I was feeling kind of tired. And I saw my old friend, Philip Sedgwick, and I walked up to him because he has my birthday. We were both born November 8th. And I walk up to him and I said, Jupiter was actually on our sun, and my sun's in the 5th house. His is in the 8th house. So I said, what's it feel like with Jupiter on your sun right now? You know, laughing because we know each other are born the same day, and that puts the sun at the same degree. And he says, oh yeah, what about Jupiter on your sun? Are you pregnant? Ha ha ha. I was. I didn't know it. That's why I felt so lousy at that conference. I was so tired. But yeah, me, the astrologer, I didn't even put it together that I was pregnant. It took Philip to point that out to me. But yeah, I know what it means when Jupiter transits the 5th house of children and conjuncts my sun. I was pregnant with my 3rd boy. Yes, I know the experience of falling in love in marriage, as Venus and Jupiter aspected both my 5th and 7th house. When I got married, Jupiter and Venus were in Parivartana, and Venus was in my 5th and Jupiter was in my 7th. No, I take that back. It was actually the reverse. Jupiter was in my 5th, the house of love and romance, and Venus was in my 7th of marriage. Yes, it worked that time. I observed K2 as it transited over my son, and my father died. That was horrible. That was in 2003 when I was writing this book. Yes. I lived through great financial losses. And I'm telling you, that was around the time I wrote that money book in 2008, when Saturn transited over my moon, which rules my 2nd house of money. I've lived the cycles of the planets through my chart, and I understand from knowing and feeling what it brings. And this can only come through experience. So you're an astrologer long enough, you experience all the transits and what they mean as they go through your personal chart. Then when you look at other people's charts and you make those predictions and they happen, you know what it means. You feel it, you know it. It's not something you memorized. This is the power of wisdom. And what is wisdom? Experience that comes through life's experience. So for right now, I'm going to close and I'm going to pick up with my whole story, My World of Astrology. This is going to be segments. And maybe you'll find it interesting, maybe you won't. But I think for those of you who are passionate enough as I were, you're going to want to learn more about astrology, because what is more powerful than predicting the future and knowing who you are? This is the divine science. Thank you.